of national concern. We discuss it. You can get a feedback by simply using our various social media platforms. Send us a message regarding that topic and the guests will respond to that. Once again, I'm Robert Chirabo. At exactly 9 minutes past the top of the hour, we kick it off with our topic today, which is we want to look at the rights of workers. Now we know many Ugandans are workers, but what terms, what conditions do they work? COVID-19 made jobs a bit scarce because some people never got back to their jobs. Now with a few jobs, some employers may take advantage of that. Do you know your rights as a worker? Do you know the terms and conditions? Well, joining me on set are two gentlemen who are from Uganda Hotels, Foods, Tourism, Supermarkets, and Allied Workers Union. A body that brings together people in this sector, but also looks at various workers in this country. I have Moses Mauku, who happens to be the General Secretary of this union. Moses, good morning.
Good morning, Brother Chirabo. I take this opportunity to salute all Ugandans, especially the workers of this country. I greet you all.
When you talk about the workers, who isn't a worker? I believe even a housewife is working. Workers, are we only referring to those that earn a monthly pay? Are we referring to some level, maybe those with this? Who qualifies to be a worker, even before we go any further, Moses?
A worker is defined differently by different disciplines. ILO, International Labour Organization, defines a worker to mean that person who offers his or her labor for purposes of earning a living. That person is a worker. So a worker, like you are saying, it's not all about salary. It's all about somebody who offers his or her labor with the purpose of earning a living. So that is a worker in general terms.
Then on my extreme end, there is a man with a very unique name. Actually, the first I've heard of it. That is John White Baleke, Director Planning and Operations. John White, most welcome to our studios.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chirabo, and a very good morning to all our viewers. I work with the HTS Union in the discipline as the Director in charge of Planning and Operations, and basically our work is to ensure that workers work within a conducive environment and within the framework of the laws established. And we are here to give details of some of these rights so that our workers and our members and the Ugandans can get to know some of them and how they're implemented and how they can also advocate for their rights.
This brings me to first shape more discussion. When you talk about unions, trade unions, workers unions, some people will tell you unions smell ugly. If you talk of an organization and you're talking about unions, the bosses can tell, don't dare. Some will tell you they welcome them. Help us demystify this thing called unions, workers unions, allied workers and all that.
Workers unions are workers organizations. The workers organizations are recognized institutions internationally and locally. I would probably say that a workers organization or a workers union is that representative, voluntary, democratic institution that is formed, run, managed, and financed by the workers themselves for the purpose of advocating, advancing, promoting, protecting, and defending the workers' social and economic interests. And all that is done through collective bargaining and underpinning the fact that there are both international standards and local legislation that guide the processes for the workers or the workers' organizations to undertake their mandate. I would probably wish to take this time to explain a little about how workers' organizations came into being. This was in the 18th century in America, where the workers in some organization, in some firm, felt they were being oppressed. You know, that time in the 18th century, we did never have, even the term workers was not there. It was a servant. And the employer today was that time referred to as, there is a term they used, masters. So it was master and servant. There was even nothing called salary for work. You would only be appreciated. And supervision was by a whip. If they find you not working, they whip you. You get. So these things have just evolved for us to even get into that relationship of employer and worker or employee. It came through a lot of struggles by those who were working those times. And they used to do boycotts, they used to do a lot of aggression that was being done that time for them to ensure that they can secure their rights. And that came to its climax sometime in the early 1990s, and that is how ILO was formed.
International Labour Organization.
Yes, in 1919. That is when the first International Labour Conference was caused in Geneva to officially form, when the government and the employers had agreed that they must recognize and work with the workers' organizations. And there are international and local legal frameworks that bring into being the workers' organizations. And these, some of the international legislation or standards are the ones that are used to even enact the labor laws or the local laws that we have here. All the 9 labor laws that we enjoy in Uganda today are derivatives of conventions that are discussed, agreed to by the tripartite partners, that is the governments, the workers' organizations, and the employers' organizations. In ILO Geneva, that is UN. So when the UN agency, known as International Labour Organization, formulates a convention or recommendations or treaties, these treaties are mandatory to be implemented by all member states of International Labour Organization, where Uganda is one of them. And actually the only country I know that is not part of is North Korea, because in North Korea they do not have, the tripartite cycle is not complete.
This brings me to John White.
Yes, please.
Now, John White, let's come back home. What is the situation like when you talk about workers' rights? He talked about the 9 labor laws we have. Can you briefly, I mean briefly, take us through them? Where are we standing as Ugandans in observing workers' rights?
Thank you so much, Comrade Chirabo. Uganda has enacted the 9 labor laws, one of which is the Labor Unions Act of 2006, the Employment Act, the Arbitration Act, the NSSF Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and the rest. On implementation, the implementation of these labor laws, I will say, is 50-50. But where unions exist, it is entirely the role of the labor unions to ensure that they work hand in hand with the employers, and they go into, they sign agreements that spell out how the implementation of these laws at the workplace is going to be done. For instance, the Employment Act spells out that workers should have a right to a day off, a weekly day off, a right to an annual leave in a year, a right to maternity leave, a right to representation, and if the labor unions have engaged with the employers, and these sections are provided for in their collective bargaining agreement, when workers complain of such issues not being implemented by the employers, then the workers' unions come in and negotiate, like he said in the in the definition that we relate with the employers through collective bargaining. So we come and negotiate with the employers on how best these rights can be implemented at the workplace.
Mauku, when we talk about implementation of these rights, I know a number of organizations, a number of employees where in these institutions you don't see workers' union. You said it's voluntary. But why is it that in most times they face resistance from any number of hotels? If we talked about having a workers' union, the proprietor would tell you, vanish. Number of organizations, constitutionally, you have the mandate. But why are we still seeing this not being welcomed by many institutions?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think let me stem it from the legal framework. We have 2 conventions among the 8 core conventions by ILO. One of the core conventions of ILO that has been ratified by Uganda is Convention 87. And that is the convention that provides for freedom of association. For the workers to enjoy the freedom to form and or join trade unions of their choosing. And the other pertinent convention among the 8 core conventions that has also been ratified by this country is Convention 98. And that is the Convention on the Right to Collective Bargaining, where a person employed has the right to collectively bargain, to negotiate his or her terms and conditions of employment. The problem arises, even here, we have 2 articles in the National Constitution. Article 29, that provides for freedom of association in consonance with Convention 87 of ILO. We also have Article 40 of the National Constitution. Those 2 articles are the ones that give birth to the 9 different labor laws that we have. And in all those labor laws, every labor law speaks about representation of a worker by a union, representation of employers by their own unions. We have Federation of Uganda Employers, which is a union for the employers, but we also have sector employers unions or associations. Like you have the Uganda Hotel Owners Association, you have TEMAU, you have Uganda Manufacturers Association. All those associations are unions by the employers. On the other hand, we have 46, I think, registered labor unions here, also to represent the workers. The problem that we have, or the reason as to why some people, some employers do not want to work with unions. Number 1 is ignorance about the law. The law, specifically, the Labor Unions Act 2006, sections 3, 4, and 5 are specific on how workers should be allowed the freedom of association. And section 24, subsection D, provides expressly that every employer is bound to recognize a trade union for purposes of collective bargaining. It is as express as it is. And so many employers do not comprehend these legal frameworks. Reason number 2 is the history of trade unions. In the early days, trade unions in Uganda started in 1937. And that was during the construction of the East African Rift Valley rail line. Because trade unions had started a little earlier in Kenya, and very many Kenyan employees crossed to work on this same rail line. While they had a union the other side that organized them and they could speak for them, they found themselves in a very precarious environment in Uganda, and somehow they convinced the Ugandan counterparts to also form a union here, so that they could have a common voice, to have representation, so that their issues could be discussed with the employers then. There were struggles here, including boycotts and other things during the 30s. And
so unions by then
40s.
were trouble causers to those employing
That
these
is what.
people.
So that history there, and even in the 80s, in the early 90s, even here, we used to have a lot of strikes by different unions. So employers still have that mentality of strikes. And the other thing still, on the negative part of it, is we have unions in the public sector. UNATU, nurses union, medical workers union. Most of the unions in the public sector today are the ones that always threaten strikes as
Very
compared
true.
to the unions in the private sector. And the reason is simple. The chief executive of the government workers, the civil servants, is a permanent secretary. And many of the employees in the public sector, some of them don't even know who their permanent secretary is. But that is the person who will resolve most of their issues. So that distance between the chief executive officer and the other person working in Katakwi or Kaperabiong, who has his issues or her issues, the only way to awaken the permanent secretary that there is a problem here is for them to say, if you don't do this, we shall not do the other.
Very funny.
Yeah, so that the problem is that...
Because when they go for this, they want to meet the president.
Exactly. For
That
us
is
in the private sector today, we have drastically scaled down on issues of industrial action in the form of strikes, because we talk to the employer directly. The owner of the company visits his business, and as long as you allow social dialogue, we speak. If there are issues, we raise the issues either through writing, we cause meetings and get to attend to these issues in a shorter period of time. So strikes have reduced because of allowing social dialogue between the employer and the workers' representatives.
John White, for workers out there, how do they join these unions? Because we know always a voice is very important. When you go to many workers, they have issues there. Sometimes non-government organizations have been their haven or redress. Sometimes others, like he said, it has been about striking. There are so many, I know, in the flour companies, those factories, workers there. Go to some of the industries. You look at their working conditions. They need protective gears, they don't have them. They get accidents, they treat themselves, they're injured on duty. You know, life goes on normally, yet there is a legal framework. There is where Uganda we are signaling that this and this must not be happening, but it's happening.
Thank you so much. Labor unions in Uganda are registered sector by sector. So the 46 labor unions Comrade Moses has talked about represent different sectors. So for instance, the HTS union is registered to represent workers in the hotels, in the tourism, in the supermarkets, the commerce sector, across Uganda. So what we do is to go and meet the workers in these different hotels, different supermarkets, and we create awareness to them in as far as their rights are concerned. And while we do that, we recruit them into labor unions. Others can learn about labor unions by getting examples from those that have benefited from labor unions. And so they can also call upon the labor unions to come and recruit them, take them on board. Though, as Comrade Moses has said, there is a lot of resistance from the employers. But when matters are easily addressed through the negotiations or the dialogues, it becomes a little easier for us or for the labor unions to recruit these workers or to bring them on board. The other issue is that the employers think that when labor unions come into place, there are some of the rights of managements that are seen to be lost. Where issues of saying a worker has committed an offense, and then the employer says, remove my uniform now and go away, those no longer exist. Because if someone has committed an offense, then the person has a right of being heard. The principle of natural justice provides that if I've committed a mistake or an offense, call me, sit me down with my representative, so that I can justify why I should not lose a job or why I should not be penalized. So when the labor unions come in place, the right of the employer chasing you as he or she wants is seen to reduce, because now the law comes in place to provide that fair hearing under Section 66, which the employer may not want. And when the labor unions come in place, the person who was going to be either terminated is seen to be reinstated on duty and continues to do work. Now, the feeling or the perspective the employer has is that when this person is reinstated on duty, the general view of the workers or management is that now the union has won, or the employees have taken it all. So they seem not to respect us any longer. But that is not the right.
Okay, rightly talked about the workers. Of course, we know, Moses, that this is advocating for the workers. But let's look at the employer. Where does he stand to benefit? You know, if I allow in my company, if I allow in my hotel to have this union, where do I stand to benefit?
Okay, thank you. One of the things, actually many times, very many employers are inquisitive to know, what do I benefit by allowing my employees to become union members? First and foremost, it is a law that requires you to recognize. So when you recognize a union, you become a compliant employer. And that is a plus on your side, becoming compliant. But the union, in representing the workers, it causes stability, industrial peace at the workplace, and it can avoid a lot of wastage that could be bad things that an employee could do in revenge for the bad treatment. When you deploy a worker who is uncertain of his or her rights, there are negativities that you will expect. It has an implication, it has effects on your productivity. Many times, workers who are not certain of their stay in an employment, they become target workers. All the time they are on the lookout of what can I take from this organization, because he's not certain of whether he will work for a longer time. You get a worker who is certain of his or her terms and conditions of employment becomes stable, becomes productive, because he's sure that my supervisor will not wake up one day and say, remove our uniform and leave. He knows he can only lose employment through procedure. He can only lose employment for the right cause. Unlike in situations where a worker comes in, not even knowing, not certain whether he will even finish a day. Those things happen. Such workers are never productive. So when the unions come into a workplace, start negotiations, establish procedures, through negotiation, you become a productive company. But that would have been created or attributed to the coming into force of the union to establish these procedures. There are also losses that companies make in the form of industrial mishandling or mismanaging industrial relations matters at workplace. There are workers who commit offenses many times, and the employer will use unlawful means to stop this person. Once that worker goes to labor courts, that worker will definitely win a matter, and you pay lots of money to a person who committed an offense, but because for you used the wrong procedures to dispose of this employee. So when the union comes through negotiation, one, they reduce on the gap, the myth that exists between an employer and the employee. The employer is all the time suspicious of this employee, and the employee is all the time thinking the employer is cheating on him or her. When we put these things on the table and we discuss, we even negotiate salaries. Why are you paying this person 500,000, not 550, or not 400? And the employee gets to understand that I was represented during the meetings that set the terms and conditions under which I work. That person is more contented with his terms. And there is a future. People work towards achieving in the future, and they become more productive. So there are various benefits that are attributed to a worker organizing into the union than the problems you will envisage. Because if you want productivity, why would you look out for only employees that you are going to cheat? Pay little when you are expecting high. It only takes somebody who is
maximization. It's all about maximization of profits.
It does not help the process of production. Maximizing.
Because one would
where
say
you would have
Uganda,
even gotten more profits, you will be losing it because you are using workers that are not contented with what they do. You will lose if your profit margin, for example, is at 40%. Probably if you had a union, you would even climb to 60% with productive workers, happy workers. You know, there is one man in Europe, Ford, the one who makes these Ford vehicles. It is a company that is very, very old. But one time he made a statement and said that, leave me, take all my riches, but leave me with my workers. I will become Ford again. Even if you removed everything of him, all the riches he had at one point in time, and left him with his workers, he would still create the riches using the workers. So many employers have not appreciated that this one worker contributes immensely to the profitability of your company.
Well, many will tell you no one
depending on how you treat him. We also have a norm where workers say, pay me the way you want and I will work the way I want. Or pay me the way I want and I will work the way you want. It is more to do with you government workers. You come and put a coat here and walk out because they are paying you the way they want. These are the strikes we are hearing and seeing every day. Government wants to pay the workers the way they want, not the way the workers want. So the workers also in government, many of them are working the way they want.
Very interesting issues of workers' welfare and rights observancy. Like we said earlier, that many Ugandans are workers by the International Labour Organization definition. But what happens is we are looking at how their rights have been protected. How is the working environment enabling them to deliver, to work at their best? Many will tell you, yes, recently I had a group of workers calling for salary increment. But my biggest question was, okay, you're talking of salary increment, but do you have the basics that you need to deliver a good job? Or is it all about your wallets being happy? But because you don't have the tools to operate, at the end of the day, you may not give good outcome. Should we first deal with ensuring that what you need is available for you to work? Then you look at your salaries, or should we first look at salaries? Then last, look at the tools that aid you to work. Well, that is a question I leave to you, most of our dear science teachers. Yes, that government promised that come the 1st of July next financial year, that enhancement, you will receive it. We hope you listen and call off that, because our children, your clients, come to school to study most of sciences. Now, John White, rightly having had the benefits for both sides, those that employ and the people they employ, let's also understand When we talk about workers' union, there is a term voluntarily, there is a term democratically. How do these two come? And then there is a term workers sustaining these unions. How do they operate? How do the three come in? Voluntarily meaning one may choose to join or not. Then democratically meaning leadership is elected. And then they fund the...
Yes, thank you so much. Those are the pillars of the union. Voluntarism is that the unions are joined by members freely. We talk to the members, we create awareness, we educate you.
So you can have a workers' union in UBC and I choose not to be part of it?
Yes. You choose not to join. But if you choose not to join, it's because of freedom of association. But if you are not a member, then you won't be represented if you have issues of disciplinary nature. And if you are to benefit from the terms negotiated and agreed upon between management and the union, then you are levied a 1% for the services the union does to you, while the member is paying a subscription fee of the 2%, depending on each individual union's constitution on their percentage of union dues to be remitted on a monthly basis from the monthly gross pay of a member. Unions are managed, run and financed by members themselves because they are workers' organizations. We don't draw monies from the employers. We don't draw monies from any other government institutions. The workers themselves fund and they run the organizations by the remittances they make on a monthly basis. So the more you mobilize members into the union, the more the capital base will grow. And as it grows, you will have some funds to enable you to reach other organizations within the jurisdiction of that particular union. So the most important thing here is that unions should be organizing on a daily basis to ensure that membership increases, the fund grows, and you reach more of the members that are within your jurisdiction. Yes.
Well, in the interest of time, gentlemen, I think I'll have your final remarks, but there is an issue that I want you to include in your final remarks. That is, today we have many workers that are working in the Middle East, externalization of labor, and we are seeing a number of reports. Do these unions, is there any legal mandate where you can come in, act, help out? This is a cry for workers, and these are Ugandans. Mauku, as you give me your concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you. I want to begin on the note of representation. As we represent workers, as workers leaders, we cannot effectively do it without representing employers. So we do represent both the workers and the employers within our sector. 2 weeks ago, I was in Geneva to represent workers in a conference where we were designing recommendations of how the tourism sector is going to be sustainable after COVID-19. I did not take permission from anybody, but I was selected as a titular to go and do that. So in doing such things, we are not only representing employees, and two, we cannot survive or thrive without employers. So in all we do, we also focus on continuity of employers or companies. So we take responsibility to also represent the interest of the employers as well, if we are to continue. Two is, I want to call on all workers in Uganda, the government and the employers, to continuously observe workers' rights, because it is the way to go. We need to do human-centered approaches in all that we do, because we are also humans. If you spoil the place where you work, the future won't be good for both the individual and the employer. I also want to mention about the issue of labor migration, especially the younger people that are flocking the Middle East for these assumed good jobs in terms of pay, but they also have very adverse effects on their lives as younger people. The government of Uganda has signed some bilateral agreements with some of the governments in the Middle East. The problem is compliance. The problem is character and maybe attitude. You know, even where these agreements do exist, the reality of what happens to this employee, because 80% or more of the migrant workers that go from Africa to the Middle East, they go and do domestic work. They are not in formal settings. The people that have gone there, I was recently in Qatar, I found a line of 6 boys speaking Uganda at Qatar airport, and I intercepted them. I greeted them in Uganda. They're doing very well smart, smartly dressed. They're doing formal employment, security. But the people who end up into people's homes, those receiving countries, they also have laws like we have here. They don't have proper mechanisms of monitoring what happens in somebody's home, in somebody's kitchen. And this is where our younger people are going to work. They're not working in government. They are not working in formal settings. Many of them are in people's homes. So what happens in the other home? It is a little bit of a nightmare. So we need to continuously engage as stakeholders, as actors, to ensure that we try to improve on what happens to this particular person who goes to work the other side. In as far as their welfare is concerned, they earn the money, yes. They have a contract of 2 years. Many of them fail to even accomplish the contract. The girl will work about 8 months before she completes her contract. She's ill. She has run mad. What happens there, we actually don't know. But very many of these girls have come back when they're totally devastated. So we need to continuously engage beyond these agreements, that the bilateral agreements, governments are sitting in an office and sign. It is important to have a longer eye into that. Begin to look into exactly what happens. Why do these young people get into trouble most of the time? But those who are chanceful, they complete their contracts, even go back and even do very well when they come back.
Well, I want to thank you so much, gentlemen. That is Moses Mauku, who is the General Secretary, Uganda Hotels, Foods, Tourism, Supermarket and Allied Workers Union. And that is John White Baleke, who happens to be the Director of Programs and Operation in the same union. Thank you so much for your time. And indeed, unions benefit both you who is employing and you who is being employed. Let's embrace them. Let's respect rights of workers. Have a lovely day. Ruben has a cup full of very entertaining sports news of what happened. So let me give him room to take you through sports updates. God bless you.